Doctors shocked as woman delivers a baby that looks like a phoenix. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly. The soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows on the walls. She had never felt so connected to something, and so terrified of it at the same time. 4 months now, strange phenomena had surrounded her pregnancy. It wasn't just the typical morning sickness or back pain. No, this was something else entirely. It started in her second trimester when Emily noticed a peculiar warmth radiating from her stomach. It wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it was soothing, almost like a gentle hug from the inside. But the warmth grew stronger as the weeks passed, to the point where Daniel, her husband, could feel it simply by placing his hand on her belly. "I'm telling you, it's just the baby kicking," Daniel had said one night, brushing off her concerns with a smile. "You're overthinking it. Every pregnancy is different." Emily wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew this wasn't normal. The warmth wasn't the only thing. There were the vivid dreams, too. Dreams of fire, wings, and a bird made of flames soaring through the sky. She would wake up drenched in sweat, the image of the fiery bird burned into her mind. At first, she kept these experiences to herself, afraid of sounding irrational. But when the lights in their living room flickered for no apparent reason every time she laughed or cried, Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. She brought it up during her prenatal appointments, but her doctors simply chalked it up to hormonal changes and anxiety. "You're healthy, Emily," Dr. Harper had said, her voice kind but dismissive. "Your baby is healthy. Try not to worry too much." But how could she not worry? Especially now, as she approached her due date, and the strange occurrences became more frequent. The warmth had turned into a soft glow at night, just faint enough to be dismissed as a trick of the light, but Emily knew better. She saw it in the mirror, a subtle golden hue emanating from her skin. Daniel still insisted it was nothing, though she noticed he had stopped dismissing her concerns entirely. Now, as she sat in the quiet of their bedroom, Emily placed her hands on her belly and whispered, "Who are you, little one?" As if in response, she felt a strong kick, followed by that familiar warmth spreading through her. It calmed her nerves, even if just for a moment. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation wash over her. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, breaking her from her thoughts. Emily gasped, clutching her belly as the pain intensified. "Daniel," she called out, her voice trembling. Daniel rushed into the room, his face pale with worry. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I think it's time." Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed her hospital bag and helped her to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, each contraction growing stronger and more painful. Emily gripped the edge of her seat, her breaths shallow as she tried to focus on anything but the pain. "You're going to be okay," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. "We're almost there." When they arrived at the hospital, the staff quickly wheeled Emily into the maternity ward. The bright fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of disinfectant filled her senses as nurses surrounded her, asking questions and checking her vitals. Dr. Carter, the on-call OB-GYN, entered the room with a reassuring smile. "Emily, I'm Dr. Carter. Let's see how we're doing, okay?" he said, his tone calm and professional. Emily nodded weakly, her body trembling from the pain. As the nurses prepped her for delivery, Daniel stood by her side, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. But as the labor progressed, something strange began to happen. The room, which had been comfortably cool, started to feel warmer. Dr. Carter glanced up at the thermostat, frowning slightly. "Can someone check the temperature in here?" he asked one of the nurses. Emily didn't notice the rising heat. She was too focused on the pain and the overwhelming pressure building within her. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she gritted her teeth, her breaths coming in short, labored gasps. "You're doing great, Emily," Dr. Carter said, his voice steady. "We're almost there." But then the lights flickered, causing everyone in the room to pause. The monitors emitted a strange hum, and the air seemed to vibrate with an energy that no one could explain. Nurse Clara, who had been assisting Dr. Carter, exchanged a nervous glance with one of the other nurses. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, his voice tinged with fear. "We're not sure," Dr. Carter replied, his tone professional but uncertain. "It could be a power surge. Let's stay focused." Emily barely registered their words. All she could feel was the overwhelming sensation of something powerful and uncontrollable building within her. She let out a cry, gripping Daniel's hand with all her strength as the final contraction hit. "It's time," Dr. Carter said. "Emily, I need one more big push." Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, Emily pushed, her entire body trembling from the effort. The energy in the room seemed to reach its peak, the lights flickering rapidly as a faint golden glow filled the space. And then, with one final cry, the baby was born. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the newborn in stunned disbelief. Dr. Carter, who had delivered hundreds of babies in his career, found himself at a loss for words. The baby was unlike anything he had ever seen. The infant's skin glowed softly, as if lit from within. Fine, feather-like tufts of what appeared to be golden down covered its tiny head. The baby let out a strong, clear cry, and as it did, a faint ember-like aura shimmered around its body, casting flickering shadows on the walls. What is that?" one of the nurses whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily, her body weak but her heart racing, reached out with trembling hands. "My baby," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Let me hold my baby." Dr. Carter hesitated, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. But Nurse Clara, her instincts taking over, gently placed the newborn in Emily's arms. As soon as the baby touched her skin, the glow seemed to intensify for a moment before softening, enveloping mother and child in a warm, golden light. Emily looked down at her baby, tears streaming down her face. Despite its unusual appearance, she felt an overwhelming surge of love and protectiveness. "You're beautiful," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "You're perfect." Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. "Emily, how?" But Emily didn't hear him. She was completely focused on the tiny life in her arms, the warmth radiating from her baby soothing her exhaustion and filling her with an unshakable sense of awe. The room remained silent, the staff too stunned to speak. Finally, Dr. Carter cleared his throat, his voice shaky but determined. "We need to monitor the baby closely. This is unprecedented." Emily nodded, reluctantly allowing Nurse Clara to take the baby to a nearby bassinet for examination. But as the nurses worked, she couldn't take her eyes off her child, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and wonder. Whatever this was, she knew one thing for certain: her baby was extraordinary. Emily lay back against the hospital bed, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. Despite the exhaustion gripping her body, her eyes never left the bassinet where the nurses were gently examining her baby. The soft golden glow surrounding the child seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive, and the room remained eerily quiet except for the hushed whispers of the medical staff. Dr. Carter stood by the bassinet, his usually steady hands betraying a slight tremble as he performed routine checks. Everything about this moment defied logic. The baby's skin temperature was elevated but not harmful. Its golden feathers were warm to the touch, almost like embers, but there was no heat strong enough to burn. The aura surrounding the baby was mesmerizing, flickering like a soft flame but emitting no smoke or smell. "Dr. Carter," Nurse Clara said softly, breaking the silence. "The baby's vitals are stable. Seems normal except for..." She hesitated, gesturing toward the glowing feathers and ember-like aura. Dr. Carter nodded, his jaw tightening as he tried to maintain his composure. "I need to think," he muttered, turning away from the bassinet and pacing the room. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense." Emily, still lying in the bed, reached out weakly. "Dr. Carter," she called, her voice trembling. "Please, is my baby okay?" Dr. Carter stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression softening. He approached the bed and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your baby is alive and healthy, Emily," he said carefully, choosing his words with precision. "But there are unusual traits we've never encountered before. I don't have an explanation yet, but I promise we'll do everything we can to ensure your baby is safe. Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. I need to see my child, she whispered. Please. Nurse Clara, sensing the urgency in Emily's voice, gently lifted the baby from the bassinet and brought it to her. As soon as the baby was placed in Emily's arms, the glow intensified briefly before settling into a steady, golden hue. The warmth radiating from the child was comforting, almost therapeutic, and Emily felt an unshakable bond form in that instant. Hi, little one, she whispered, cradling the baby close to her chest. I don't know what you are or why you're here, but you're mine, and I love you. The baby let out a soft coo, its tiny hands reaching up as if to touch her face. Emily smiled through her tears, her fear giving way to an overwhelming sense of wonder and love. Daniel, who had been standing silently in the corner of the room, finally approached. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He hesitated for a moment before sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the child in Emily's arms. Can I hold them? He asked, his voice barely audible. Emily nodded, carefully passing the baby to him. As soon as the child was in Daniel's arms, the glow flickered, and the warmth spread through him. Daniel's breath hitched, his hands tightening protectively around the baby. They're warm, he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. It's like holding a little piece of the sun. Emily smiled, her tears continuing to flow. That's our baby, she said. Our little miracle. The room remained quiet as the three of them shared this moment, the weight of the child's uniqueness settling over them. But outside the delivery room, the hospital was abuzz with whispers and speculation. News of the extraordinary baby had already begun to spread among the staff, and the mystery was impossible to ignore. The following morning, Emily woke to the sound of voices outside her room. She blinked groggily, her body still sore from the delivery, and turned her head to see Daniel sitting by her bedside, the baby cradled in his arms. The soft glow still surrounded the child, casting a gentle light across the room. Daniel? Emily murmured, her voice hoarse. What's going on? Daniel looked up, his face tense. There's someone here to see us, he said. Dr. Carter brought in an expert. Someone who might be able to help us understand what's happening. Emily's heart skipped a beat. An expert? Before Daniel could respond, the door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was tall and composed, with sharp features and a piercing gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, and she wore a tailored suit instead of a doctor's coat. Good morning, the woman said, her voice calm and authoritative. My name is Dr. Ilara Klein. I specialize in rare medical phenomena and genetic anomalies. Dr. Carter reached out to me last night and shared some intriguing details about your child. Emily sat up slowly, her arms instinctively reaching for her baby. Daniel handed the child to her, and she held them protectively as Dr. Klein approached the bed. May I? Dr. Klein asked, gesturing toward the baby. Emily hesitated, her grip tightening. You're not taking them away from me, she said firmly. Dr. Klein held up her hands in a gesture of reassurance. I'm not here to take your baby, Emily. I'm here to help you understand what makes them special and to make sure they're safe. Emily relaxed slightly but kept the baby close. What do you know? She asked, her voice trembling. What's happening to my child? Dr. Klein pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression thoughtful. First, let me say that I've never seen anything like this before. But throughout history, there have been stories, legends, and rare cases of phenomena that defy scientific explanation. Some of these involve children born with extraordinary traits that align with certain mythologies. Mythologies? Daniel interjected, his brow furrowing. You're saying this has something to do with myths? Dr. Klein nodded. Specifically, the phoenix, a creature from ancient lore, said to be reborn from fire and ashes. Your child's traits, the glow, the warmth, the feathers, are strikingly similar to descriptions of a phoenix in various cultures. Emily's mind raced as she tried to process the information. But that's just a story, she said. It's not real. Many myths have roots in reality, Dr. Klein replied gently. I'm not saying your child is a phoenix. What I am saying is that their unique characteristics could be tied to a rare genetic mutation or something we don't yet understand. Do you think they're okay? Emily asked, her voice cracking. Are they healthy? Dr. Klein's expression softened. From everything I've seen, your baby is perfectly healthy. In fact, they appear to be thriving. But I'd like to run some tests, non-invasive ones, just to learn more about what makes them special. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel, who nodded. Okay, she said finally. But I'm staying with them the whole time. Of course, Dr. Klein agreed. I wouldn't expect anything less. As the tests began, Emily stayed by her baby's side, watching intently as Dr. Klein and the hospital staff worked carefully to gather data. They monitored the baby's body temperature, which remained consistently warm but not dangerous. They observed the feathers, which seemed to shed faint embers before regrowing almost instantly. And they noted the baby's remarkable ability to calm those around them, an effect that seemed to spread like a ripple through the room. It's extraordinary, Dr. Klein murmured, watching as one of the nurses, who had been visibly anxious moments before, visibly relaxed after holding the baby for just a few seconds. Your child's presence seems to have a soothing effect on others. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. Emily smiled faintly, her heart swelling with pride. They're special, she said simply. I've known that from the moment I felt them move inside me. Dr. Klein nodded, her gaze thoughtful. They are. And I believe they have a purpose, one we may not fully understand yet. The words lingered in Emily's mind as she cradled her baby later that evening, the hospital quieting as night fell. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She would protect her child at all costs. The days following the baby's birth were a whirlwind of emotions, discoveries, and challenges. Emily remained at the hospital with her baby, refusing to leave their side for even a moment. The staff, though initially skeptical and wary, began to accept the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the newborn. Dr. Klein worked tirelessly, coordinating tests and gathering data, but every result only deepened the mystery. The hospital room had become a quiet sanctuary for Emily, Daniel, and their child. Despite the strange and unprecedented situation, there was peace in their little corner of the world. Emily cradled the baby, now affectionately called Aurelia, marveling at the soft glow of their skin and the way their tiny fingers gripped hers with surprising strength. Daniel sat beside her, his arm draped over her shoulders. I still can't believe this is real, he said, his voice filled with awe. Our baby, a phoenix? We don't know that for sure, Emily replied, though the word had taken root in her mind. But whatever Aurelia is, she's ours. And that's all that matters. Daniel smiled, leaning down to kiss the top of Aurelia's head. She's perfect. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Dr. Klein entered, carrying a folder filled with the latest test results. Her expression was calm but serious, a mix of professionalism and empathy. I have some updates, she said, pulling up a chair beside Emily. First, I want to reassure you that Aurelia is completely healthy. Every test we've run confirms that her body functions are normal, just with some unique variations. Variations? Daniel asked, leaning forward. Dr. Klein nodded. Her body temperature is consistently higher than average, but not dangerously so. It seems to be a natural part of her physiology. The glow and feathers appear to be extensions of her body, but they don't seem to cause her any harm. In fact, her feathers regenerate at an accelerated rate, which is something we've never seen before. Emily listened intently, her hand resting on Aurelia's back. And the aura? She asked. That warmth we feel when we hold her? Dr. Klein hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. We're still studying it, but it seems to have a psychological effect as well as a physical one. Aurelia's presence has a calming influence on those around her. It's almost as if she projects a sense of peace. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel, her heart swelling with pride. She's special, she said softly. I've felt it since the moment she was born. Dr. Klein smiled faintly. She is. And while there's still so much we don't understand, one thing is clear. Aurelia is thriving. The peace inside the hospital was soon disrupted by the world outside. Despite the staff's best efforts to keep the situation private, word of Aurelia's unique traits had leaked. A nurse, overwhelmed by the strangeness of the situation, had shared a vague account with a friend, and the story quickly spread. Within days, the hospital was surrounded by reporters, protesters, and curious onlookers. Emily and Daniel watched the chaos unfold from their hospital window, their hearts sinking. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Journalists shouted questions at anyone who entered or exited the building, while protesters held signs with messages ranging from "a miracle among us" to "abomination against nature." "I knew this would happen," Daniel muttered, his fists clenching. "People can't leave well enough alone." Emily placed a hand on his arm, her touch soothing. "We'll protect her," she said firmly. "No matter what." Dr. Klein entered the room, her face etched with concern. "I'm sorry," she said, closing the door behind her. "We did everything we could to keep this private, but the story's out. The hospital has issued a statement asking for privacy, but it doesn't seem to be making much of a difference. What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Klein hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I've spoken with the hospital administrators. They're willing to provide a secure space for you to stay until the media frenzy dies down. But in the long term, you'll need to think about how to navigate this. Aurelia is extraordinary, and people will always be curious about her." Emily's heart ached at the thought of her child being treated as a spectacle. "She's just a baby," she said. "She deserves to grow up like any other child. And we'll do everything we can to ensure that," Dr. Klein replied. "But we need to be realistic. The world has seen something it doesn't understand, and it's human nature to seek answers. It's up to you how much of Aurelia's story you choose to share." As the days passed, the media presence outside the hospital only grew. Emily and Daniel stayed confined to their room, reluctant to expose Aurelia to the outside world. But inside the hospital, the baby continued to thrive, her unique traits captivating everyone who encountered her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Dr. Klein entered the room with a grave expression. "Emily, Daniel," she said, "I think it's time to make a decision. The hospital can only shield you for so long. The longer this goes on, the harder it will be to protect Aurelia's privacy." Emily cradled Aurelia against her chest, her mind racing. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Dr. Klein hesitated. "The media wants answers. If you're willing, we could hold a controlled press conference. You'd have the opportunity to address the public directly, to set the narrative on your terms." Daniel frowned. "You want us to put our daughter on display? Like she's some kind of exhibit?" "No," Dr. Klein said firmly. "But the truth is, the more we hide, the more people will speculate. If you show them that Aurelia is just a baby, a beautiful, healthy baby, it might help dispel some of the fear and misinformation." Emily looked down at Aurelia, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. The thought of exposing her child to the scrutiny of the world was terrifying, but she also knew they couldn't live in hiding forever. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But on one condition: Aurelia's safety and well-being come first. If I sense anything is putting her at risk, I'm pulling the plug." Dr. Klein nodded. "Of course. I'll make all the arrangements and ensure everything is as secure as possible." The day of the press conference arrived, and the hospital's largest conference room was transformed into a controlled media environment. Only a select group of journalists was allowed inside, each carefully vetted. Security was tight, with guards stationed at every entrance and exit. Emily sat at a table at the front of the room, Aurelia cradled in her arms. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Dr. Klein stood nearby, ready to step in if needed. As the cameras flashed and the reporters began to ask their questions, Emily took a deep breath and spoke. "This is Aurelia," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "She's our daughter. She's healthy, she's happy, and she's loved." The room fell silent as the journalists absorbed her words. Aurelia, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, let out a soft coo, her golden glow illuminating the table. "She's different," Emily continued. "But aren't we all? Aurelia is a miracle, a reminder that there's so much about life we don't understand." But what I do know is this: she's not something to be feared. She's a gift. The reporters remained silent, their cameras clicking softly as they captured the moment. Finally, one of them raised a hand. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "what do you want the world to know about your daughter?" Emily smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want the world to know that she's just like any other child. She deserves to grow up in a world that loves and accepts her for who she is." As her words echoed through the room, the tension seemed to dissolve, replaced by a sense of wonder and hope. Aurelia, oblivious to the attention, snuggled against her mother's chest, her tiny hand gripping Emily's finger. For the first time since her birth, Emily felt a sense of peace. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: Aurelia was destined for greatness. The press conference had a ripple effect far beyond what Emily and Daniel had anticipated. The images and videos of Aurelia, glowing softly in her mother's arms, spread across news channels, social media, and blogs. Reactions varied wildly. Some people called her a miracle, others saw her as a scientific anomaly, and still, a few viewed her with fear or suspicion. But one thing was clear: Aurelia had captured the world's attention. Back in the safety of the hospital, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through the countless articles and comments about her daughter. The mix of praise and curiosity was overwhelming, but it was the negativity that stung the most. Some people demanded that Aurelia be studied in a lab, claiming she was unnatural. Others accused Emily and Daniel of staging a hoax for fame. Daniel entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He noticed the worry etched on Emily's face and sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her knee. "Stop reading those," he said gently. "You'll drive yourself crazy." "I can't help it," Emily replied, her voice heavy with emotion. "They're talking about her like she's something to be dissected." "She's just a baby, Daniel." "Our baby?" Daniel sighed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "People fear what they don't understand. But we know who she is. She's ours, and that's all that matters." Emily leaned into him, finding solace in his presence. "What if they don't leave us alone?" she whispered. "What if this never goes away?" "Then we'll figure it out," Daniel said firmly. "Together." Despite the chaos outside, life inside the hospital found a strange rhythm. Emily and Daniel focused on caring for Aurelia, who continued to thrive. Her golden glow seemed to grow stronger each day, and her calming aura had a profound effect on everyone who came near her. Nurses who had been skeptical or fearful now found themselves drawn to the child, marveling at her warmth and tranquility. Dr. Klein continued her research, working tirelessly to understand Aurelia's unique traits. She spent hours in the hospital's lab, poring over data and consulting with colleagues from around the world. But no matter how much she studied, the answers remained elusive. One evening, as Dr. Klein reviewed her notes, she was interrupted by a knock at her office door. Emily stepped inside, holding Aurelia in her arms. The baby's soft glow illuminated the dimly lit room. "Dr. Klein," Emily began, her voice hesitant. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," Dr. Klein replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What's on your mind?" Emily sat down, adjusting Aurelia in her lap. "I've been thinking about what you said before, the connection to the phoenix. I know it sounds crazy, but do you think there's any truth to it? Could she really be connected to something so mythical?" Dr. Klein leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "The phoenix is a powerful symbol in many cultures," she said. "It represents rebirth, immortality, and resilience. While I can't say for certain that Aurelia is tied to those legends, I do believe that her traits, her glow, her warmth, her ability to calm those around her, align with the symbolism of the phoenix." Emily looked down at her daughter, who was gazing up at her with bright, curious eyes. "But why her?" she asked softly. "Why us?" Dr. Klein smiled faintly. "Sometimes, the universe doesn't give us answers. It just gives us the gift and trusts us to figure out what to do with it." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and responsibility. "All I know is that I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." Outside the hospital, the situation grew increasingly tense. While many people expressed support and admiration for Aurelia, others continued to protest. A particularly vocal group began demanding access to the baby, claiming that she belonged to the public as a scientific discovery. The hospital's security team worked tirelessly to keep Emily, Daniel, and Aurelia safe, but the constant presence of reporters and protesters took its toll. Emily often found herself looking out the window, wondering how they would ever find peace. One morning, as she fed Aurelia in her room, Daniel entered with a serious expression. "Emily, we need to talk," he said. She looked up, immediately sensing his concern. "What is it?" "I've been speaking with Dr. Klein and the hospital administrators," he began. "They think it might be time for us to leave. The media frenzy isn't dying down, and it's only a matter of time before someone tries to break through security." Emily's heart sank. "Leave? But where would we go?" "They've arranged for us to stay in a secure, secluded location," Daniel explained. "Somewhere we can be safe and have some privacy. It's not ideal, but it might be our best option right now." Emily hesitated, looking down at Aurelia. The thought of uprooting their lives was terrifying, but she knew Daniel was right. Aurelia's safety had to come first. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." The move was carefully orchestrated, with security personnel escorting the family to a private home in a remote location. The house was surrounded by tall trees, its secluded setting offering a sense of peace and security. For the first time since Aurelia's birth, Emily and Daniel felt like they could breathe. The days that followed were quiet and filled with simple joys. Emily spent hours holding Aurelia, singing to her and marveling at the way her golden glow lit up the room. Daniel took on the role of protector, ensuring that their new home was secure and helping Emily adjust to their new routine. But even in their solitude, the outside world wasn't far from their minds. News of Aurelia continued to dominate headlines, and Emily often wondered how they would navigate the challenges that lay ahead. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Emily sat on the porch with Aurelia cradled in her arms. Daniel joined her, handing her a cup of tea and sitting beside her. "It's beautiful here," Emily said, her voice soft. "Peaceful." "It is," Daniel agreed. "But I know this isn't the life you imagined for us." Emily shook her head. "It's not about what I imagined. It's about what's best for her. And right now, this is what she needs." Daniel nodded, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from her face. "You're an amazing mom, Emily." Tears filled her eyes, and she leaned into him. "I'm just doing my best." As the weeks turned into months, Aurelia continued to grow, her unique traits becoming more pronounced. Her glow was brighter, her feathers more vibrant, and her calming aura seemed to extend further, affecting anyone who came near her. Emily and Daniel were in awe of their daughter, but they couldn't ignore the growing sense that Aurelia was destined for something greater. One day, as Emily watched Aurelia playing on a blanket in the living room, she noticed something remarkable. Aurelia reached for a small, stuffed bird, her tiny fingers brushing against it. As she touched it, the bird seemed to glow faintly, its colors becoming more vivid. "Daniel," Emily called, her voice filled with excitement. Daniel rushed into the room, his eyes widening as he saw what was happening. "Is she?" "I don't know," Emily said, her heart racing. "But I think she's doing something." Aurelia giggled, her golden glow brightening as she played with the toy. Emily and Daniel watched in awe, realizing that their daughter's abilities were far beyond what they had imagined. "She's special," Daniel said, his voice filled with wonder. "She's going to change the world." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, she is." As they watched Aurelia, their hearts swelled with pride and love. Whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together as a family. Years passed, and Aurelia grew into a curious, intelligent, and radiant child. Her golden glow, once faint and subtle, had become a defining feature. It wasn't just her appearance that set her apart. Aurelia had an aura about her that could calm even the most troubled hearts. Wherever she went, people felt at ease, as though a quiet warmth had settled over them. Emily and Daniel had done everything in their power to provide her with a normal life, though normal was a relative term. They had stayed in the secluded home for the first few years of Aurelia's life, focusing on nurturing her in an environment free from prying eyes. But as she grew older, they realized they couldn't keep her hidden forever. She needs to experience the world, Emily said one evening as she and Daniel sat on the porch, watching Aurelia chase fireflies in the yard. She's so curious, so full of life. We can't keep her locked away. Daniel nodded, though the thought of exposing their daughter to the world filled him with anxiety. But how do we protect her? He asked. People will always see her as different. Emily placed a hand on his. She is different. But maybe that's not something we need to hide. Maybe it's something to celebrate. When Aurelia turned 5, Emily and Daniel made the difficult decision to move back into society. They found a small town where the pace of life was slow, and the community was known for its kindness and open-mindedness. At first, they kept Aurelia's unique traits private, dressing her in long sleeves and hats to conceal her glow. But it wasn't long before her true nature began to shine through, literally. It started one day at the local playground. Aurelia was playing on the swings when another child fell and scraped their knee. The little boy cried, clutching his leg, while his mother rushed over. Aurelia, without hesitation, ran to the boy's side and gently touched his shoulder. As soon as her hand made contact, the boy stopped crying, his expression softening. The golden glow around Aurelia seemed to extend to him, and within moments, he was smiling. The boy's mother stared in astonishment. "What just happened?" she whispered, her eyes darting between Aurelia and her son. Emily, who had been watching from a nearby bench, quickly approached, her heart pounding. "She has a way with people," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's just who she is." The woman nodded slowly, still trying to process what she had seen. But instead of reacting with fear or judgment, she smiled. "She's remarkable." Word of Aurelia's abilities spread quickly through the small town. At first, Emily and Daniel feared the worst, that people would demand answers or treat Aurelia as an outsider. But to their surprise, the community embraced her. People began referring to her as the Little Light, a name that seemed to capture both her glow and the way she made others feel. As Aurelia grew, so did her understanding of her abilities. She began to notice how her presence affected people, how her touch could bring comfort and peace. "Why am I like this?" she asked Emily one evening as they sat together in the living room. Emily stroked her daughter's golden hair, her heart swelling with love. "Because you're special," she said. "You have a gift, Aurelia. One that makes the world a better place. Do you think I'm different because of the bird in your dream?" Aurelia asked, her bright eyes filled with curiosity. Emily froze for a moment, the memory of those vivid dreams flooding back to her. She had never shared them with Aurelia, but somehow her daughter seemed to know. "Maybe," Emily said softly. "But no matter where your gift comes from, it's a part of you. And we love you just the way you are." Aurelia nodded, her little face thoughtful. "I think I want to help people," she said. "Like the way I helped that boy at the playground." "You already are," Emily said, pulling her into a hug. "You're helping just by being you." By the time Aurelia was 10, her reputation had spread far beyond the small town. People began traveling from all over to meet her, hoping to experience the peace and comfort she brought. Emily and Daniel were cautious about who they allowed into their lives, but they couldn't ignore the profound impact Aurelia was having on the world. One day, a journalist from a major publication reached out, asking to write a feature on Aurelia. At first, Emily and Daniel hesitated, fearing it would bring unwanted attention. But Aurelia, now wise beyond her years, spoke up. "Mom, Dad, it's okay," she said. "Maybe if people understand me, they won't be afraid anymore." Reluctantly, Emily and Daniel agreed. The journalist, a kind and empathetic woman named Clara, spent a week with the family, observing their daily life and interviewing them about their journey. The resulting article was both heartfelt and respectful, painting Aurelia not as a mystery to be solved but as a symbol of hope and resilience. The article went viral, touching hearts around the globe. People began referring to Aurelia as the Phoenix Child, a name that celebrated her unique traits and the legend she seemed to embody. Though the attention was overwhelming at times, it also brought with it an outpouring of love and support. As the years went on, Aurelia's influence grew. She spoke at schools, hospitals, and community centers, sharing her message of acceptance and kindness. Her presence seemed to heal not just individuals but entire communities, bridging divides and fostering understanding. Emily and Daniel watched with pride as their daughter blossomed into a compassionate and confident young woman. Despite her fame, Aurelia remained humble, always remembering the lessons her parents had taught her. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, Aurelia turned to her mother. "Mom, do you ever think about what it means to be a phoenix?" Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think it means you're strong," she said, "that you have the power to rise above anything and bring light to the world." Aurelia nodded, her golden glow softening as she leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I like that," she said. "I want to keep rising, no matter what." Years later, Aurelia stood on a stage in front of thousands of people, her golden aura illuminating the crowd. She was now a young adult, her glow more radiant than ever. She had become a global symbol of hope, her story inspiring countless people to embrace their differences and find strength in their uniqueness. As she addressed the crowd, her voice was steady and filled with conviction. "We all have something that makes us special," she said. "Something that makes us shine. Don't be afraid of your light. Let it guide you and let it guide others." The audience erupted into applause, their faces lit with admiration and hope. Emily and Daniel watched from the front row, their hearts bursting with pride. They had always known Aurelia was extraordinary, but seeing the impact she had made on the world was beyond anything they could have imagined. As the applause died down, Aurelia looked out at the crowd, her gaze soft and full of gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me," she said. "And thank you for letting me share my light with you." Later that evening, as the family returned to their home, Aurelia sat down to write a letter. She addressed it to her future self, reflecting on her journey and the lessons she had learned. "Dear Aurelia," she wrote, "never forget where you came from. Never forget the people who loved you, believed in you, and helped you become who you are. The world can be a big and scary place, but you have the power to bring warmth and light wherever you go. Keep rising, keep glowing, and always stay true to yourself." She folded the letter and placed it in a box, her heart full of hope for the future. As she turned out the lights and climbed into bed, her golden glow filled the room, a gentle reminder of the extraordinary gift she carried within her. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, a phoenix soared, its fiery wings lighting up the sky.